So let's begin with the question of why Labour has been such a political disaster in recent years in Scotland. Monica Lennon, what's gone so badly wrong?
Well, we've been struggling to win elections for a very long time. It's not a recent problem. We've been in opposition in Scotland since 2007. And I think it's fair to say, Christian, that we have failed to learn lessons. We stopped actively listening to people, especially in working class communities, and they've taught us a very harsh lesson. But I've been in Parliament now for one term, and I've come in to do politics differently. I'm a new generation of leader. I've got a good track record in Parliament, and I think if we can concentrate on the issues that matter most to people, we'll start to regain their trust and their confidence. And this has been a really good contest. It's been a good exchange of ideas, but people are looking for a sign that Scottish Labour is willing to change, and that's what I offer.
Anna Sarwar, what do you think has been such, what's gone so badly wrong with Labour? I mean, it's been a disaster politically.
Look, Monica's right. We have had a gradual decline since the start of devolution, but sadly in recent years that decline has been accelerated, not slowed down or reversed. And part of the issue is when you have rising injustice, inequality and division in our country, the Labour Party has not been on the pitch. We haven't given the people of Scotland the Labour Party they deserve. We've sometimes looked too inwards rather than outwards. There's no doubt that we have struggled with the constitutional debate and discussion as well, perhaps squeezed out because we're not naturally bound by the politics of identity. And instead want to talk about things about challenging child poverty, creating a greater education system and rebuilding our NHS. But all these things are huge, huge challenges for us. And we have got to rebuild, and change is an important part of that. Change in terms of how we look and sound as a political party. I would contest as a 37-year-old from the west of Scotland with an Asian background from Muslim heritage. No one can accuse me of being part of Scotland's past. I think it's a good symbol of Scotland's future. But we've also got to talk about the big issues that are presenting in front of the people of Scotland. And I think actually, whilst we've had the tragedy of COVID, it gives us an opportunity, because I think people don't want to go back to the old arguments pre-COVID. Instead, they want us to focus on what unites us as a country rather than what divides us as a country. And I think only Labour can credibly do that. I don't think the Tories can do that. I don't think the SNP can do that. Labour can do that again, but we need to get back on the pitch.
Right, but I mean, that's a sort of a preposterous statement, really, that only Labour can do that, because you are literally third in the polls and continue to be. So what's the biggest thing you would change?
So I'll tell you why it's not a preposterous statement. It's because coming through COVID, you've got the Tories on one hand, who want us to take us back to a binary argument. There's no one credibly believes that they can build a recovery that works for everyone. And they want to have army tank driving, Union Jack waving, chest beating unionism. And on the same time, you've got the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon, who partly to heal the wounds in their own party will advocate, referendum tomorrow, independence tomorrow. When in actual fact, I think regardless of which side of the yes or no divide you're on, I think people recognise we need a period of calm in Scotland. We need a period of healing in Scotland, and we should instead focus on building a COVID recovery parliament where we focus on a catch-up programme on our education system, catching up in terms of, for example, cancelled operations and cancer services in Scotland, and we focus on ending child poverty, something that is a fundamental mission, what the Labour Party should always stand behind.
OK, Monica Lennon, what's the biggest thing you would change?
Well, if I can just pick up on the point about the Constitution, because there clearly is an ongoing debate in Scotland about what Scotland's future relationship with the UK should be. But I don't agree that it has to be a divide between yes and no, because that was the referendum that we had in 2014. I recognise that a majority of people in Scotland actually do want change, because they do want to address inequality and the lack of opportunity. And the way to do that is for Scottish Labour to have something to say about the Constitution, because we believe in devolution. We delivered a Scottish Parliament, but that journey isn't complete. There are more powers, Christian, that should come from Westminster to the Scottish Parliament, and we've been too quiet on that issue for too long. That's why I've said we will fight to remain in the UK, but we want more powers over employment law, powers over drugs. We have the highest drug death rate in Scotland, in Europe, and no one in Westminster is prepared to change the law, the Misuse of Drugs Act. We need decriminalisation in Scotland. So people in Scotland want to see that Scottish Labour is standing up for people in Scotland, and we do need to have constitutional change, and we can do that as well as fighting for the NHS, fighting for our local councils, fighting for our schools. Because Anas is right, the SNP and the Tories have failed communities. Nicola Sturgeon promised that she would close the poverty-related attainment gap, and she's failed to do that. That was her #1 pledge to the people of Scotland, and she has failed.
Well, you've gone straight to the heart of the disagreement, really, between the two of you, which is what you should do about a referendum. If the people of Scotland vote for pro-independence parties in the election this year, should there be a second referendum? And Monica Lennon, you're saying you wouldn't stand in the way of it.
I've always said that if people in Scotland at any point in the future determine that they want to have a referendum and they express that at the ballot box, then as Democrats, we have to respect that. Now, I don't particularly want there to be a referendum, but if there's going to be a referendum, we can't make the mistake that we made before 2014, where we left it to the pro-independence side and the Tories, who were wanting the status quo. We left it to them to set the terms of that referendum, and it was a binary divisive referendum. I believe that more power should come to Scotland. We should be bold about that. We should make the case for Devo Max. So a referendum shouldn't be something to be afraid of. If it happens in the future, then Labour should be making a positive, progressive case for remaining in the UK, but bringing more power and opportunity to Scotland. And that's a case that we've not been making at a grassroots level. So whatever happens after Saturday, I will be appealing to Scottish Labour not to be timid, not to sit on the sidelines and wish this away, because that would be a disaster for Scottish Labour.
Anna Sarwar, are you prepared to now say that if the Scottish people vote for pro-independence parties who are demanding a referendum, the people of Scotland should get one?
No, Christian, I think it's important to make a differential here in terms of whether we could have a referendum, whether we should have a referendum. And I think this is when you talk about the fundamental disagreement, I don't actually think there's a fundamental disagreement, because I agree with Monica that we need greater devolution. What I would contest is we don't need a referendum to deliver greater devolution. If we think it's the right thing for us to do to deliver greater devolution to Scotland, from Westminster to Scotland, but I would also contest from Holyrood down to local authorities, why wait for a referendum to do it?
So you would stand with Boris Johnson in refusing?
No, not at all. I mean, the idea that I stand with Boris Johnson on anything, given his comments about race and about Islamophobia in general, is just ludicrous. I don't stand with Boris Johnson on anything. The point I'm making is...
Well, you stand with him on that, don't you?
No, what I'm saying is, coming through COVID, I accept that we've got to rebuild our country, but are we honestly saying that we're going to come through the collective trauma of COVID and move straight to an independence referendum campaign that's going to pull our country back apart again? I just don't think that's credible. Instead, I think true leadership right now is to say to the people of Scotland, whether you're a yes or you're a no, let's pull our country together and focus on what unites us, not what divides us. That, I think, is what the true leadership is. In actual fact, I think Nicola Sturgeon would be advocating that herself if she wasn't worried about their own divisions in their own political party. So let's have a recovery in Scotland. Let's make sure it's a recovery that works for everyone. Part of that is, of course, looking at our devolution settlement. Part of it is, of course, looking at our constitution. But are we honestly saying that we're going to distract from that recovery coming through COVID and go back to arguing amongst ourselves over a referendum question? I just don't think that's credible. And I think it lets down the very people that need politicians focusing on what matters to people right now, rather than focusing what we think appeals to the Twitter bubble.
Monica Lennon, answer that.
Well, I've said all along throughout this leadership contest that I will actively listen, not just to people in our own party and movement, but in our communities. And what I hear clearly is that people want change. That's why people are frustrated. That's why they've not been voting for Labour, because they don't really feel that we have a particular view on the Constitution. Now, I believe that we should prioritise the NHS, economic recovery, public services. All these things are absolutely important. But it would also be negligent to ignore public opinion polls in Scotland, 22 now, where people are expressing that they want change. Now, at the moment, they only have a binary question to answer. Do you want independence in the future? Do you want to remain in the UK? I think it's the job of Scottish Labour to make a progressive alternative argument. There is no grassroots campaign right now in Scotland making that argument. And Blair McDougall, who led the Better Together campaign, made that point recently in a newspaper article, that people who care about remaining in the union from a left perspective need to have a grassroots campaign. We're still getting very much a top-down campaign, which, you know, I respect the work that Keir Starmer is trying to do through the Constitutional Convention, and he's got Gordon Brown involved, and that's great. But actually, people feel that political parties are still very much out of touch with their everyday experience. And that's why I'm saying Scottish Labour needs to change. That's why I'm standing as a fresh candidate. I wasn't part of
But aren't you making the same old Scottish Labour mistake when it comes to devolution in believing that that's the way to stop independence? It didn't work in 1999. It didn't stop the SNP in its tracks, and it won't stop them now.
Well, this isn't actually about stopping independence. It's about how do we make people's lives better. 1 in 4 children in Scotland are living in poverty. That's around 250,000 children. That's what people care about. But right now they feel that they're getting nowhere. People are working harder and harder, or key workers, and their pay is not good enough. We've got key workers in our hospitals who are having to go to food banks. So people don't actually care about the constitutional powers, but they want to know that powers in the Parliament will be used progressively, and if there's more that can be done to bring power closer to the people, whether that's coming from Westminster or elsewhere, that happens. But they need politicians who are going to be accountable and transparent. We're seeing the SNP falling apart internally, but above all, they don't want politicians to lecture and tell them, oh, you're wrong to think about the constitutional argument because of a pandemic. People are expressing their frustration. People are expressing that they want change. And if Scottish Labour don't have any answers on that, then they won't turn to us at the ballot box on the 6th of May. So it's not about being irresponsible, it's about being democratic. And the only way to get people's trust is to show that you're listening, that you understand.
Well, Christian, the point here is, we're participants, we're not spectators. I think what the danger here is we're spectating on what we think is the inevitability of an SNP victory, therefore the inevitability of a referendum, and therefore the inevitability of independence. We're participants. We need to be making the case. In my view, honesty is actually saying what you believe. I don't believe in independence. I don't think having a referendum coming through COVID is the right answer. Instead, I believe we should be focusing on what unites us as a country. And that's why I just don't think it's credible for us to be talking about what might happen after May. Monica is right. People do want change. But you know what people are worried about right now? What people are worried about right now is making sure their loved ones are safe, making sure they get access to a vaccine, wondering if they're going to get back to work or if the job is still going to be available once lockdown is over. They're worried about the education catch-up for their kids. They're worried about their children's mental health. They're worried about what the economy looks like in the future. They're worried about the climate emergency. They're worried about the NHS, whether they're going to get that cancer diagnosis in time or when they're going to get that cancelled operation. That's what we should be talking about as a Labour Party, not being obsessed with a narrative that the SNP or the Tories want us to have, to think it's all about the Constitution or all about an independence question. These are the issues that matter to people right now in Scotland. And if Labour's not going to champion those causes, if Labour's not going to talk about those issues, who else will? Let's not play the SNP and the Tories game for them.
But haven't you just contradicted yourself in the course of this discussion? When I asked you what was wrong in the past, you said we hadn't addressed the constitutional question. And now you're saying...
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say we hadn't addressed it. I said we struggled to come to terms with the yes or no question and the aftermath of that question. There is no doubt that coming through the referendum campaign, the Labour Party looked like it vacated the field. It looked like we were turning in on ourselves and not looking outwards. We failed to be on the pitch. I want the Labour Party back in the pitch.
OK, I mean, the question is, what is your top priority? Because at the moment, the Conservative Party is the official opposition in Scotland. And in many ways, that's because a lot of Scottish unionists, people for whom the union is the most important thing, are clear that the Conservative Party's top priority is saving the union. What is your top priority, Monica Lennon?
My top priority is ending child poverty. 1 in 4 children in Scotland being in poverty is a national scandal, and the Tories and the SNP have failed to fix that. They've made that worse. So I've set out proposals in detail about how we can end child poverty within a decade and cut it by half within 5 years. Today, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have backed up proposals that I've made by agreeing that the Scottish child payment should increase to £30 a week in the next parliamentary term.
For Scottish voters who seek a party whose number one priority is saving the union, their party will remain the Conservative Party if you were to lead Labour, because your number one priority is child poverty. Do you accept that?
Well, I think the way people vote is tied up in lots of different issues. Most people don't want to see people queuing at food banks in George Square in Glasgow. Most people don't want to see children going to school hungry. But this is where I'm saying that we need to have a more nuanced discussion, because issues about the Constitution do have an impact on people's quality of living. I said earlier on, we've got the highest drug death rate in Scotland. We've just learned yesterday there's been an increase in people dying who are homeless. About half of those deaths are drug related. I've not heard anyone in Scottish Labour for a long time arguing that those powers should just come to Scotland. Now, we don't need to have a referendum, but right now people are thinking that Scottish Labour are just prepared to say something to kind of placate people, but then we won't actually do anything about it. So if Anas does win on Saturday, then I hope he will get on the phone to Keir Starmer to make the urgent call that we need to look at drug policy right across the UK, because that is killing working class people in Scotland and it's killing working class people across the UK. I'm glad in this contest we've been able to debate it, but these issues are important to people, and if people feel that Labour has been too ambivalent about it and too scared to take on issues that feel controversial. But thousands of people in Scotland are dying because of these issues.
Anna Sarwar, what is your top priority? Is it saving the union?
Look, first of all, I challenge the premise of the question. The idea that the Tories are the great saviours of the union is just ridiculous. The biggest threat to the United Kingdom is Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. But what's my priority? Like Monica, I share the ambition to end child poverty, but also I'm fundamentally a politician that wants to pull our communities together in Scotland. And I want us to focus on what unites our country, not what divides it. I've said it several times tonight, and I say it deliberately for a purpose, because we need leaders that want to pull our country back together again. And sadly, we don't have that. Monica raises really important issues around drugs deaths. Of course, we should be reforming how we deal with drugs, but let's not ignore the fact that we have the exact same law in Scotland as the rest of the UK, where we have 3 times as many drug deaths. Yes, that's partly the powers, and we've got to explore the powers and change what we can change, but we've also got to change the investment that's taking place in terms of those alternative treatments, in terms of the rehabilitation centres, in terms of the beds that are available, and those budgets have been decimated by the SNP. So let's not give them a free ride out of this. Yes, let's look at the powers. But let's look at what we can do.
And I show that I got the minister sacked. The minister had to resign in December, but that doesn't get away from the fact that the legislation is wrong. And we can't just say, well, fewer people are dying in other parts of the UK.
I'm not saying that.
The legislation.
You know, I'm not saying that.
We need to get rid of that legislation.
One death is one death too many. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is it also goes alongside budgets. It goes alongside resource. But of course, it's to do with powers as well. But we've got to get the powers right. We've also got to get the budget right as well.
Now, when it comes to leadership, the leadership in London is also important when it comes to Scottish voters. Think about the history of Harold Wilson and Tony Blair, big surges in Scottish support for the Labour Party. How does Keir Starmer measure up? Is Keir Starmer more appealing to Labour voters in Scotland than Jeremy Corbyn was, Anna Sarwar?
Look, I think we've got to capture the radicalism of Jeremy Corbyn, but the statesmanlike and maturity and confidence that have been demonstrated by Keir Starmer. I want Keir Starmer to be Prime Minister. I'll work with Keir Starmer, I'll support him, I'll respect him. But be in no doubt, if I'm successful on Saturday, I will be the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and I will do what is right for Scotland, stand up for Scotland. And if Keir Starmer or any other UK Labour politician is getting it wrong, I won't be afraid to speak out and challenge them.
So do you think you're more left-wing than him?
No, I'm not necessarily saying that. I think Keir himself has said that he wants to capture the radicalism of what we had under Jeremy Corbyn, but also look to the future. And that's something I think we should be able to get behind. And one of the things I'm really pleased about is we have got a manifesto programme that we're building in Scotland that I think will unite our movement in Scotland. Is something that we can go out and pitch together in the election in May.
Monica Lennon, what's your view of Keir Starmer? Is he more appealing than Jeremy Corbyn to Scottish voters?
Well, I think actually in both Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, we have a really good team. Angela Rayner joined a Zoom call with my local community just this week, where she listened to home carers, frontline workers, council workers, and her lived experience as someone who's lived in poverty, been a home carer, is now the deputy leader of our party, she went down really, really well. And it's been difficult, of course, because Keir and the team haven't been able to come to Scotland and campaign with us. But what I would say has been really good about Keir, he's come on to virtual town hall meetings with people who have stopped voting Labour, former members, former supporters, to understand, like I want to do, what we can do to win their trust back. So we've got a hell of a job to do. That's why we are in the fight of our lives. That's why I've stood in this contest, because I worry that we're going to keep doing the same things and be in the same comfort zone. We need to snap out of that. You know, people in our country are really, really struggling. The SNP have been in power for too long now. This will be 14 years. And even some of their biggest cheerleaders have said this week that they could be doing with a period in opposition, because we can see now that they are fighting, they're taking the voters for granted, they're making mistakes and they're letting people down. And that's why it's really important for Scottish Labour to get our act together.
I mean, just finally, I mean, can we just sort of lift the lid off what you're both saying there? I mean, Anna Sarwar, it seems to me that Monica Lennon is accusing you of being, you know, the same old thing, not enough change.
Well, as I say, anyone that thinks a 37-year-old boy from west of Scotland, from an ethnic minority background, Muslim heritage, is more of the same, I think isn't probably looking properly enough. I'm saying right front and centre, the Labour Party's not been good enough. It's not been good enough for years. I wasn't part of the last few years. I want to change it. I want to rebuild it, and I'm going to work day and night to change it, because Scotland deserves a better Labour Party.
Monica Lennon, are you saying that? Are you saying that Anna Sarwar is not enough change for the Labour Party?
No, I think Anas has called himself the youngest veteran in Scottish Labour at one point. You know, he was a deputy leader at 27, and that's fantastic. But what I'm saying is that where we are right now, we do need a new approach. We need to do politics differently. I came into Parliament in 2016. I've hit the ground running. I've got a good track record of progressive change. My members' bill has ended period poverty, and now countries around the world are trying to do the same. We were told it couldn't be done, it was too bold, it would be too expensive. So that's the kind of politics that I offer. People don't have time for politicians to navel gaze and to have long commissions and long debates. We just need to get out there, roll up our sleeves and give people the help that they deserve. Look at the key workers who've kept this country running. And they're still, even today, not getting the right PPE in our hospitals and in our care homes. That's a UK-wide issue. So I am on the side of those workers. They deserve a pay rise and they deserve to be safe at work. And that's my priority. So we need to get out there and be a confident Scottish Labour Party, but absolutely be in touch with our communities.
Well, Anna Sarwar, Monica Lennon got the first word, so you get the last.
Look, whatever happens in this contest, I know that Monica and I are going to work together to rebuild the party, because Monica's right. We are in a really, really bad place, and there's no point pretending otherwise. We are fighting for the survival of the Scottish Labour Party. And if we do want to rebuild our country, if we do want to focus on the issues that matter to people, then we've got to pull together. And that's a commitment. Whoever wins this contest, we are determined to give people the party they deserve.
Anna Sarwar, Monica Lennon, thank you both very much.